Ethan Cole had weathered many journeys across the Wild West, but nothing had prepared him for the storm that swallowed him whole that afternoon. What began as a distant swirl of dust became a roaring wall of sand that blotted out the sun and erased the horizon. His horse panicked. The compass on his belt spun uselessly, and every familiar landmark vanished under a curtain of wind and grit. Ethan tried to push forward, shielding his face with his scarf, but the storm shredded his sense of direction until he no longer knew north from south, or if he was even walking in circles. Hours felt like days. His throat burned, his lips cracked, and his legs shook from exhaustion. When the storm finally loosened its grip, he was staggering through a barren stretch of land that looked nothing like the map he carried. He stumbled into a canyon he didn't remember seeing before, its walls tall and jagged, like the earth had split open to swallow the unwary. The air inside was strangely calm, sheltered from the storm's rage. For a moment, Ethan thought he had found safety, but safety was a fragile illusion out here. What he didn't know was that he had crossed into land watched with ancient vigilance. While he tried to drink from his canteen and catch his breath, unseen eyes tracked every movement he made. The first sound he heard was the scrape of something against stone. Before he could reach for his pistol, shadows peeled themselves from the canyon's edges. One by one, silent figures stepped forward. Women painted with ochre and midnight blue patterns that marked them as warriors of a tribe he had only ever heard whispers about. Their braids were adorned with feathers, beads, and fragments of bone that clicked softly as they moved. Their spears were carved with symbols older than the towns Ethan mapped. Shock pinned him in place. He had been in dangerous situations before, but nothing like this. These women didn't approach like bandits or raiders. They moved with deliberate grace, their formation precise, their expressions unreadable. When the leader raised her hand, the others surrounded him in a circle that felt more ceremonial than aggressive. Ethan tried to speak, but the words dried up in his throat. One of them stepped forward and bound his wrists, not roughly, not cruelly, but with a solemnity that chilled him more than violence would have. He realized then that he wasn't being treated as a trespasser or an enemy. He was being taken, chosen even. And though fear gnawed at him, another feeling stirred beneath it. Curiosity, sharp and unsettling. The canyon seemed to seal behind him as they guided him deeper, into shadows where secrets lived and outsiders rarely returned from. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the storm had not delivered him to danger by accident. It had delivered him to destiny. Ethan expected his capture to end with judgment, maybe even a swift execution. The Apache women moved with a quiet authority that made it clear he was no more in control of his fate than a leaf in the wind. They guided him through twisting canyon paths until the rock walls opened into a hidden settlement. A place built from sun-baked clay, woven reeds, and stone carved with symbols that shimmered faintly in the firelight. Smoke curled lazily from cooking fires, the scent of sage and desert herbs filling the air. Everything felt intentional, sacred, even the silence. Ethan sensed immediately that this was not a camp. It was a refuge, a world apart from the chaos of the frontier. As they led him toward the heart of the village, the women parted, forming a corridor that pulled his gaze to the structure at the center. A ceremonial lodge adorned with feathers, polished stones, and cloth dyed in deep crimson. Inside, lit by a ring of torches, stood the woman he somehow knew was the ruler without anyone needing to say it. She was tall, with long black hair flowing like night water down her back. And her posture radiated the kind of calm power that needed no threat to be respected. Her eyes were what held him, though. Deep, steady, and assessing him with the intensity of someone reading a story written beneath his skin. Her name was Nayeli. She approached slowly, each step measured, as if following a rhythm handed down by generations. She circled him once, twice, studying him as though confirming something only she could see. Ethan felt exposed in a way he never had before, not physically, but spiritually, as if she were peeling back layers of his life he had never spoken aloud. Then she spoke, her voice low, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. She said he had not wandered into their canyon by accident. He had been brought by the spirits, summoned. Ethan blinked in confusion, certain he had misheard. He was a map maker, not a warrior, not a prophet, not some figure from an Apache legend. But Nayeli was unmoved by his disbelief. She declared to her warriors that he was the one foretold in the visions, a man who would arrive in their time of transition, not as conqueror or captive, but as a sign. The women around him murmured, some uneasy, some skeptical, some strangely reverent. Ethan felt the ground tilt beneath him. He had expected anger, interrogation, perhaps execution. Instead, he stood before a queen who believed destiny had written his arrival long before he was born. And though he couldn't understand it, couldn't even begin to accept it, the certainty in her gaze shook something inside him. A small, quiet part of him wondered if the storm hadn't been a random disaster after all. Maybe in a land shaped by myth and wildness, reason wasn't the only truth. Nayeli raised her hand, silencing her warriors, and spoke the words that sealed his fate. He was chosen. The spirits do not make mistakes. Ethan had no idea what that meant for his future, but one thing was certain. He was not leaving this place the same man who entered it. In the days that followed, Ethan learned that the world inside the canyon followed rules entirely different from the ones he knew beyond its walls. From sunrise to moonrise, the Apache women moved with a rhythm that felt older than any map, any settlement, any wall man had written. At first, he expected the hostility that came with captivity. Strict guards, harsh treatment, constant suspicion. Instead, he found himself under the watch of warriors who studied him like an unanswered question. They didn't trust him, but they didn't treat him as an enemy either. He was something else, an anomaly the prophecy had brought them, but the world had not prepared them for. This tribe was unlike any Ethan had heard stories about. Generations ago, he learned their men had fallen in war, leaving behind mothers, daughters, widows, and warriors who refused to flee or fade into the shadows. Instead, they built a society of their own, a sovereign sisterhood forged through loss, sharpened by survival, and guided by traditions that blended wisdom with ferocity. They hunted as a collective, trained every girl from childhood in archery and spearwork, and charted the desert with a knowledge deeper than any mapmaker could draw. Ethan watched them move across the canyon as if the land itself breathed with them. Every woman carried two roles, protector and healer, strategist and nurturer, warrior and teacher. They gathered herbs from the canyon walls and used them to craft medicines capable of calming fever and closing wounds. They read the stars with uncanny precision, predicting weather shifts and tracing the path of migrating herds. They practiced silent signals so complex that entire conversations passed between them without a single word spoken. For the first time in his life, Ethan realized how little he knew. He, the cartographer, who prided himself on understanding landscapes, suddenly found himself in a place whose terrain went far beyond sand and stone. Here, the land had stories. Here, every path and shadow meant something, and these women were the storytellers. But beneath their harmony, Ethan sensed tension. Whispers floated through their circles, fragments of conversations about settlers pushing westward, about rival tribes who had begun circling their hunting grounds, about the fear that their sanctuary might soon become a battlefield. The tribe stood at the edge of change, uncertain whether to reveal themselves or remain ghosts of the canyon. That was when Ethan began to understand why Nayeli had spoken of him with such conviction. To them, he wasn't just an outsider. They believed he was a sign, a turning point. Still, trust did not come easily. Some warriors glared when he passed, hands tightening on their spears. Others watched him with curiosity, as if waiting to see whether he would betray them or prove the prophecy right. Even children, bold and bright-eyed, would run up to examine him with a mix of wonder and suspicion. Yet slowly, something shifted. Ethan found himself helping with small tasks, mending a water pouch, identifying ridges from afar, explaining how he read terrain on paper. The women listened, analyzed, compared his methods to their ancestral ones. And in return, they taught him pieces of their world, where to find water hidden under desert stones, how to interpret the flight of ravens, how to feel the subtle tremor of distant footsteps through the earth. He was still a prisoner, but no longer a stranger. And with every passing day, Ethan felt the truth tightening around him like a lasso. This tribe did not simply exist hidden in the canyon. They thrived in ways the outside world could never understand. And whether he wanted it or not, he was becoming part of their story. The acceptance Ethan thought he had earned was only an illusion. Beneath the calm routines of the tribe, a harder truth waited. Nayeli's belief in him did not erase the doubts sown deep among her warriors. Doubts sharpened by years of loss, betrayal, and the constant threat of outsiders. If Ethan was truly the man spoken of in their visions, then he needed to prove it, not with words or accidental survival, but through strength, courage, and spirit. And for that, the tribe had their own ancient way of knowing. It began before sunrise, when two warriors entered his shelter and ordered him to follow. Without explanation, they led him to a narrow canyon path lit only by the fading moon. The air was cold, unnervingly still. Ethan's heart pounded, not from fear of death, but from the uncertainty of what waited ahead. When the path opened into a wide circle of stone, dozens of women stood in silence, and Nayeli stepped forward to speak. She told him the prophecy did not simply identify a man chosen by fate. It demanded proof that the spirits had not been mistaken. To earn their trust, truly earn it, he must endure the same trials their warriors faced when they came of age. These tests were not about strength alone, nor speed, nor knowledge. They were about character, will, purpose, spirit. The first trial forced Ethan into the heart of the desert, with nothing but a blade and his instincts. He had to track prey through shifting sands, find water where none seemed to exist, and return before nightfall. He learned quickly that the desert could be both a graveyard and a guide depending on how you approached it. By watching the birds, feeling the temperature of the stones, and listening to the faint pulse of wind in the canyon walls, he managed to bring back a hare, exhausted, sunburned, but alive. The second trial tested his honesty. Nayeli brought him before 3 elders who questioned him about his past, his failures, his fears, and what he sought from life. They asked things he had never spoken aloud, things he had buried beneath years of travel and work. For the first time, he shared the truth of why he wandered. Not for maps, not for exploration, but because he was running from a life that had lost its meaning. The elders listened without judgment, but when they dismissed him, he felt as though they had peeled apart the layers of his soul. The third trial came without warning, an attack that neither trial nor prophecy had prepared him for. A rival band of raiders swept into the outskirts of the canyon, catching a hunting party off guard. Ethan had been gathering wood when he heard the shouts echo across the stone walls. He could have hidden. He could have waited. He could have told himself it wasn't his fight. Instead, instinct drove him forward. He rushed toward the commotion and found 2 warriors surrounded, their spears knocked from their hands. Ethan didn't stop to think. He grabbed a fallen spear and threw himself into the fray, fighting with a desperation born from survival rather than skill. He blocked a strike meant for one woman, took a blow to the shoulder, and fought until the raiders retreated. When it was over, the warriors he had helped stared at him, not with suspicion, but with startled respect. The tribe's perception shifted that day. Whispers of doubt faded into murmurs of approval. Even the fiercest skeptics could not ignore what they had seen. Ethan hadn't fought like a chosen man from legend. He fought like someone trying to protect people who had once been strangers, but were now something more. That night, when he returned to the central lodge, Nayeli met his gaze with a quiet certainty. Without speaking, she lit the ceremonial fire, a gesture that said everything her warriors needed to hear. Ethan had proven the spirits right, not because he was destined, but because when the canyon needed him most, he chose to stand with them. Days after the attack, when the wounds on his shoulder had begun to heal and the whispers of the tribe had softened into acceptance, Ethan was summoned to a place few outsiders or even tribe members were ever allowed to enter. 2 warriors, their faces painted in deep red and black patterns, escorted him through a narrow passage that wound upward through the canyon wall. The climb was steep, silent, and illuminated only by torches whose flames flickered like restless spirits. Ethan felt tension coiling inside him. Whatever awaited him at the top was not another trial. It was something far more final. The passage ended in a chamber carved directly into the cliffside. Its walls etched with generations of symbols, stories of ancestors, battles, triumphs, and sacrifices. At the center of the room, a fire burned low, but steady, casting golden light onto the one figure already waiting there. Nayeli stood tall in the glow, her braids adorned with feathers and bone talismans reserved only for queenly ceremonies. Around her, the air felt heavier, as if the canyon itself was holding its breath. She gestured for Ethan to step forward, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. She studied him with the same piercing eyes that first evaluated him in the ceremonial lodge. But this time, there was no uncertainty in her gaze, only recognition. She began to speak, her voice soft but resonant, like the slow rhythm of a river meeting stone. She told him that the prophecy had long been misunderstood, even by her own people. The elders believed a man would come to lead them, to reshape their fate. But Nayeli revealed the truth buried beneath the legend. The prophecy did not foretell a savior. It foretold a seeker, someone not brought to rule, but brought to transform. Someone whose own spirit was fractured, wandering, unanchored. Someone who needed them as desperately as they needed him. The spirits, she said, had not chosen Ethan because he was powerful. They had chosen him because he was lost. Ethan felt the weight of her words settle into him, like the final piece of a puzzle he didn't know he'd been assembling. All his life, he had traveled from place to place, tracing the outlines of a world he never truly belonged to. He mapped lands that others would inhabit, but he himself never stayed. The storm that had nearly killed him, the canyon that had swallowed him, the tribe that had tested him, none of it had been an accident. Somewhere deep inside, he realized he had known that from the moment he looked into Nayeli's eyes. She stepped closer, her presence warm and grounding. She offered him two paths. The first was freedom. She would have him escorted beyond the canyon, given supplies and directions, allowed to return to the world he knew. No chains, no threats, no expectations. He could walk away from all of it. The prophecy, the trials, the tribe, and her. The second was to stay, not as a prisoner, not as a chosen savior, but as something far more significant, an advisor, a bridge between their hidden world and the changing land beyond it, a protector of their history and a witness to their future, a man who would walk beside the queen, not above her, not below her, but alongside her. Ethan looked around the chamber, the symbols glowing in the firelight, the echoes of generations speaking through stone, the woman who had believed in his purpose before he ever understood it himself. He thought of the warriors who had tested him, the children who had stopped running from him, the quiet peace of the canyon mornings, and the newfound strength he had discovered within himself. He thought of the map he had been trying to draw his entire life, a map that finally made sense. In that moment, the decision came to him with startling clarity. The world he knew was built on dust and restlessness. The world before him was built on meaning. Ethan stepped forward, not toward freedom, but toward belonging. And as the fire crackled with rising flame, the canyon welcomed not a chosen man from legend, but a man who had finally chosen his own destiny. Ethan's journey began as a desperate struggle for survival in a merciless storm, but it became something far greater, an awakening shaped by fate, forged by trial, and guided by the hands of those he once feared but came to admire. What started as a simple path across the Wild West transformed into a crossing between worlds. The world he came from, where he was a wanderer with no true home, and the world he discovered, where every stone, flame, and heartbeat carried purpose. In the hidden Apache Sisterhood, Ethan confronted not only danger, but himself, his doubts, his loneliness, and the emptiness he had been trying to outpace for years. Through their trials, he learned that strength was not born from muscle or weapons, but from choices made when no one was watching. He learned that belonging is not given, it is earned. And he learned that destiny is not a prophecy carved into stone, but a path revealed one courageous step at a time. Nayeli did not save him. She simply saw in him what he had never seen in himself. And her tribe did not need a hero. They needed someone willing to understand, to respect, to listen. In choosing to stay, Ethan did not abandon his old life. He completed it. He found the place all wanderers search for but rarely find, a purpose worthy of their journey. The lost cartographer entered the canyon a stranger. He remained there a man reborn, not because he was chosen by spirits, but because he finally chose who he wanted to be. In the end, the Wild West did not break him. It revealed him.